And you're watching Sporting Icons.
Right, so stick with me on this video. It will make sense as this video goes along, especially when it comes to its conclusion, providing of course you watch it all. And it's going to make more sense for a lot of you guys who are true boxing fans. For those of you who are just here to troll or maybe just support one fighter, sorry, I may as well be speaking Chinese, but I will try and dumb it down. It is what it is, okay, for you little trolls out there. But hopefully it will make sense as this video goes along and people will understand why I've done this one. Okay, now I've just done the heavyweight division. I've pulled out a whole bunch of names from the heavyweights, as in the top name guys, and we're going to have a look at their careers in brief. All right, now we're going to start off with Anthony Joshua. Again, it's in no particular order, by the way, but we're going to start off with Anthony Joshua. As an amateur, 43 fights. As a pro, 24, so that's combined 67. I know you guys are clever enough, you don't need me to do the combined, but just for transparency. So Joshua's had, in total, he's walked to a boxing ring 67 times. Now, as an amateur, 43 fights is absolutely sod all. That is not much at all. And considering when you look at most fighters around the world, they have like hundreds and 200s and 300s, and some go way higher than that just as an amateur. And where is it that you really learn your craft? In the amateur system. So Joshua has been learning on the job as a professional. But within those 43 fights as an amateur, of course, Olympic gold at super heavyweight. As a professional, he's a two-time heavyweight champion of the world. He does have one blemish on his resume, which is a loss, but he did avenge that one. So currently he has defeated every man that he's ever faced. So he's a two-time WBA, IBO, WBO and IBF unified heavyweight champion of the world. In fact, all those belts he collected one at a time. Well, WBA, IBO come as a package. But with wins over Andy Ruiz Jr, of course, Vladimir Klitschko, Carlos Takam, you've got Alexander Povetkin, Dillian White, who was undefeated at the time. You've got another two undefeated guys as well in Dominic Brazil and Charles Martin in that as well, which a lot of people were actually picking them to beat Joshua at the time. Either way, you can see that is one hell of a resume, isn't it? That is absolutely outstanding considering only a combined 67 fights. Again, people have to remember, he is actually still learning on the job. Right, let's move over to the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury, the man who has won every bout the heavyweight division has to offer, even from novice level right the way to the peak of world. So Tyson Fury's had 35 amateur fights. That, again, is absolutely sod all. And 31 professional fights, so 66 combined. He's actually had one fight less than Anthony Joshua. I mean, what really can you say about Tyson Fury? He's done absolutely fantastic. Again, because of his lack of amateur career, only 35 fights, he's actually been learning on the job as well. Again, I think people do actually forget that. Okay, so as an amateur, did he achieve the pinnacles? No, not really, but to be honest, I don't think he was really looking for it. I know that he wanted to represent Ireland at the Olympic Games. Due to his lineage not being strong enough, they didn't deem it like that he could, or it was something like that, either way. But even so, as an amateur, he did do very well. As a professional, we know that he's done very well with all the belts and everything that he's won. But of course, with wins over Vladimir Klitschko, which is, in my opinion, by far the best win on his resume. Then, of course, you've got Deontay Wilder twice. One of them is officially a draw. Derek Chisora a couple of times as well. Originally, Chisora, the very first one that he fought, Chisora was undefeated at the time. And you can even throw in there the likes of a Christian Hammer, who at the time was a good touted European level fighter. So Tyson Fury has very good resume. Again, both Joshua and Fury, phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal considering the amount of fights that these guys have had. Deontay Wilder, a very short career as an amateur, so 35 fights, exactly the same as Tyson Fury, not many fights whatsoever, but of course he did win the Olympic bronze at heavyweight. Now, not to be confused with super heavyweights such as like Joshua and many others like George Foreman, Lennox Lewis, etc. But this is at heavyweight. It's equivalent to cruiserweight. Okay, so either way, within a very short career of 35 fights as amateur, done very well. As a professional, 44 professional fights. One of those is a draw. And the other one is a loss. Arguably, the both should be a loss. But either way, combined 79 fights. In the grand scheme of things, That is not a lot. In fact, a lot of people were saying due to Deontay Wilder's very, very short amateur career, he's been learning all the way through. And it's true, he has been. That's why he's been slow-tracked rather than fast-tracked. Okay, and it's only really like the last couple of years he started to take a couple of risks. But you can see why, because of his lack of amateur experience. And combined 79 fights, that is not much at all. But already, of course, he was a former WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Could he defeat Tyson Fury in a rematch to become a two-time WBC heavyweight champion of the world? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But when you look at it honestly, with only 79 fights, for what he's achieved, he's done very, very well. Let's be brutally honest. Next one, Alexander Povetkin. With 132 amateur fights and 42 professionals, that's a combined 174. That is probably about right for what a boxer should have. If we're going to be brutally honest, 174, 150, maybe 200 fights combined is probably about right. Okay, but as an amateur, of course, Olympic gold medal at the super heavyweight division, and he does actually have 7 losses as an amateur as well. But here's a little fact for you: all those 7 losses, he actually avenged. So he actually defeated every man that he's ever faced as an amateur. Again, absolutely phenomenal. But he didn't just win the Olympic gold, he won the World Championships, the European Championships. He won so much stuff as an amateur, and of course former kickboxing champion as well as a professional with 42 fights. That's a hell of a lot of fights, isn't it? Not as many as Wilder, but still, he's a former WBA regular world heavyweight champion, and a resume is absolutely outstanding. He's been in the ring with so many good top-rated fighters. And now I know a lot of people probably look at his resume and go, well, I don't really know who like a lot of these guys are. But at the time, they were highly, highly rated, like Chagayev and that, for example, quite a few others. Of course, he's been in there with Vladimir Klitschko and Anthony Joshua. Of course, come up short in both of them. He's got a win over Dillian White. He's got a win over Ruiz Fury, David Price, and the list goes on. His resume is absolutely outstanding, but 174 fights combined. King Kong, Luis Ortiz. That's a hell of a lot of amateur fights, isn't it? 362 amateur fights and 33 professional. So a total of 395 times he has walked to the ring for a boxing fight. Now, within those 362 amateur fights, he actually didn't do anything. He never even got to the elite level of the Cuban national team. Again, it's a fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. So he's only ever won domestic, as in Cuban, titles. He never qualified for the Olympics. I know some people get confused with another Luis Ortiz back in the 80s who went to the Olympics and done well for Cuba. It's not the same one, all right? Again, the other one was much, much smaller. But considering he's had so many amateur fights and never even made it to the elite level of the Cuban nationals, that'll tell you that he spent way too long in the amateur system. As a pro, that's quite a lot of fights, isn't it? But again, his best win is arguably a Brian Jennings. He does have 2 losses on his resume, where he did very, very well in both the fights, but of course got stopped by Deontay Wilder. But overall, his resume is, let's be honest, pretty piss poor. 395 fights, what's he really achieved for it? And he's only really got one decent payday, which was his last one against Deontay Wilder. The next one, Andy Ruiz Jr. 110 amateur fights and 35 professional fights. So a total of 145 fights. Even that is not a lot. It really isn't. It's decent amount, but it's not a hell of a lot. As an amateur, he did very well, and he does hold victories over quite a few good names. He does have a loss to, is it Oscar Rivas? I think actually beat him as an amateur as well. Of course, as a pro, only 35 fights. He's been in 3 world title fights, 2 of them with Anthony Joshua, where he won the first one, lost the second one, and his other one was, of course, what some would deem a controversial decision against Joseph Parker. But Andy Ruiz Jr., he's done very, very well, especially considering 145 fights, which isn't a great deal, but it's not bad either, okay? So the next one, Joseph Parker from New Zealand. 66 amateur fights. That's not really a lot, is it? As a pro, 29 professional fights. Of course, as an amateur, I don't know too much about his amateur career. I have heard that he's done quite well. I think one of his biggest rivals as an amateur was Junior Farr I believe so. But as a pro, former WBO heavyweight champion of the world, he's been in there with some very good fighters. Of course, he's come up short against Dillian White and Anthony Joshua. They're the only 2 blemishes on his career. But he has been in there with Hughie Fury, beat Hughie Fury. He's been in there with Carlos Takam, beat Carlos Takam. And the list goes on, okay? So for me, Joseph Parker is one of the top heavyweights. I know not a lot of people really rate him nowadays, but he is. When he gets his nasty side on, he is very, very good. But a total of 95 fights combined. So again, not that many really if you look at it. Next one, Dillian White. 7 amateur fights, 29 professional fights. As a combined 36 fights. So he's walked to the ring for a fight in the boxing ring 36 times. Now, as this video went along, I'm sure a lot of you guys agreed that Joshua, Wilder, Fury, Parker didn't have a great career, really, as in extensive career. They haven't had a lot of fights. So what is it that you think when you look at Dillian White? 36 combined. Now, I haven't quite finished, okay, so there is going to be one more that may surprise some people in a second. But 36. As an amateur, only 7 fights. And his amateur debut was against Anthony Joshua, where he defeated Anthony Joshua. But as a professional, he's been in there with Anthony Joshua, Alexander Povetkin. Of course, he had come up short against them. He's defeated the likes of Joseph Parker. He's defeated, and undefeated at the time, former world heavyweight champion Lucas Browne. I know people want to mock and snigger now, but at the time, a lot of people were picking Parker to win. Okay, there wasn't like a great plethora of a queue to be fighting Lucas Browne. It wasn't Dillian White's fault that Lucas Browne didn't really turn up in the best of condition. But either way, he's been in there with Derek Chisora twice. Robert Helenius was once upon a time tipped to replace Vladimir Klitschko, believe it or not. But prior to Dillian White, Helenius, he only had 1 loss on his resume. That was to Johan Dubois, where he was handling that fight quite well. But then as heavyweight boxing goes, he got caught. But Dillian White, when you look at his career, with the fact that he's been in there and defeated, say, the Oscar Rivas on top of that one as well, he has done phenomenal. Only 36 fights combined. Now, here might be a little bit of surprise for you, where people say, but you need the amateur. That's what sets you up. Because with Dillian White, of course, again, he's been learning on the job. For those of you who agree that Joshua and Fury and that and Wilder and that were learning on the job, then you have to agree Dillian White certainly is. Okay. Now, everybody that I've mentioned so far has had a whole ton more than Dillian White. In fact, over double, really, isn't it? But here's a little bit of a surprise for you. Dan Dubois, 75 amateur fights, 14 as a pro, combined 89. So Dan Dubois has walked to the boxing ring over twice as much as Dillian White. But yet Dillian White, you know, he's been taking on the top guys, as we quite clearly know. But Dan Dubois, people, including myself, say, but he's still young, he's still a novice, he's still learning, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, he's had double the fights of Dillian White. That's the truth of it, isn't it? Now, for me, I was quite surprised when I looked at it. I didn't think that he had that many amateur fights, but he has. 75 amateur fights. Again, as an amateur, he did do very, very well. Of course, there's no Olympics on his resume or anything. And as a pro, again, he has done very, very well. Arguably, his best win is Nathan Gorman and maybe a Fujimoto in that, for example. And certainly, if he defeats a Joe Joyce as well. Now, I haven't put in there the likes of Joe Joyce and, say, Alexander Usyk, for example. These guys have had extensive amateur careers, okay? So that would just well and truly tip the scales, wouldn't it? But the whole point of this one is that those who mock and snigger the fact that Dillian White got caught with one punch by Alexander Povetkin, even though that he was handling his business in that ring and even dropped the very, very experienced and seasoned Alexander Povetkin twice in round number 4. I know people, a lot of people want to put emphasis on age, but come on now. It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's ridiculous. But let's all give, say, Deontay Wilder credit for defeating an even older man who achieved nothing in Luis Ortiz, shall we? That's the reality of it, isn't it? And if you guys are going to be brutally honest, 36 fights combined. And look who it is that he's been in the ring with. Talk about testing yourself. When he calls himself the can man, it's for a very, very good reason. And within those 36 fights, he tried to fight Tyson Fury. He tried to fight Deontay Wilder. He's already fought Joshua twice, once as an amateur, one as a pro. Pretty outstanding, don't you think? Anyway, drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, subscribe, catch you all in the next video.